everybody, my name is Karen Fabian and I'm the founder of Bare Bones Yoga, and my specialty is anatomy. Thank you so much for joining me here on my YouTube channel. So I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the postures that I know students really want to learn how to do, and that is a full back bend or wheel. Now, how do I know this? Well, I know this because over my 15 or 16 years of teaching, it's by far the posture that I get asked about the most in terms of how can I do this pose. And over the years, I've played with lots of different ways to present this posture in an effort to really broaden its accessibility. So one of the things I want to talk about first is why this pose can be so challenging for people. And it's not that there's always the presence of all these things. It could just be one of these things. It could be a combination of these things. But it's helpful to kind of think about it through the anatomical lens, and that's my specialty, and that's definitely a way that I like to break things down in an effort to increase accessibility to as many people as possible for all postures. And I'll preface this by saying it's not about getting into one particular pose. However, if there is a posture that people generally want to learn how to do, it really can be helpful to give them lots of different ways to try to do it, because we want them to enjoy their practice and we want them to get that feeling of accomplishment. And sometimes, let's face it, it comes from the ability to actually do a pose that you've been striving to do and you've been unable to get there. So let's talk about a couple things. So when you think about wheel itself, it's a full back bend and the hands are on the ground and the feet are on the ground. So right out of the gate, it's really challenging because it's kind of a locked-in posture. The other thing to think about is when we're asking people to bend through the thoracic spine where the ribs are, it's generally pretty stiff there. And so that can be a difficult place to get movement. It's going to be really easy for them to move through their head. If you want to just test this theory out, put people on their knees and ask them to come into camel, and you'll see for the most part, even though they probably intellectually know they should be bending through their whole spine, especially the thoracic, where you will generally only see movement is through the head. And so you'll ask them to come into camel and you'll just see them tip their head back and they'll stay there. And unless you're really actively and appropriately cueing, that's going to be their impression of camel posture. The other thing to think about is we don't often, if ever, move in this direction during the day. It's not as if we're going into our kitchen and reaching like this to get into our cabinets, right? We're much more commonly flexing the spine and folding forward or bending down. So this is a pretty unfamiliar movement for us. So when you think about moving in a way that's unfamiliar, of course it's going to be harder, and in some cases even your nervous system might stop you because it's unfamiliar with the direction you're moving in. The other thing to think about is in order for me to bend in this way, I have to have some good flexibility on the muscles in the front of the body. So if we talk about the muscles in the chest, the pectoral muscles, if we talk about the muscles in the hips that flex the hip, now I'm taking the hips into extension. So those muscles like the psoas and the quadriceps femoris, which crosses both the hip and the knee, those muscles, the sartorius, need to be flexible so that I can move this way. And in a lot of people who are passively sitting most of the time, they're just not. Or maybe they're actively contracting those muscles like in running or rowing or bike riding. And then the last thing to think about, there was one other thing I was going to say. Moving backwards tight, it just kind of left my mind. So let's just say in general, oh, I know, the other thing is the erector spinae muscles. So if you envision three longitudinal muscles that run alongside the spinal column on both sides, when we move into spinal extension, which is this, versus spinal flexion, those muscles need to be strong. But think about what your students are probably doing all day. They're hunched over their computers. So those muscles are definitely not working. In fact, they might want to work, but we're just resisting it by hunching down all the time. And so when we come into these active back bends, we're asking those muscles to contribute in a way that they're just not familiar with, and they're probably pretty weak. So all those things together can appear in somebody, or maybe one more than the other, but the bottom line is it can be a really hard posture to do. And there's one other thing. When you think about the position of the hands, the wrists are in extension and the palms need to be flat. So then you need pretty good mobility in your wrist joints, and that can also be challenging, as well as just upper body strength. So when you look at that long list, you might kind of throw up your hands and say, oh my goodness, why am I even teaching this pose? But I've come up with a way that I find is helpful for people, because when you think about where they want to drive the pose from, they want to drive it from their legs, especially their glute max and their hamstrings, because those are muscles of hip extension, and they're on the back of the body. We definitely don't want to use stuff in the front of the body. That's all stretching. So we want to use back body musculature to get us up and back. But if we take away the fact that both hands are on the ground and we just have one hand down, it can be helpful to give us a little bit of freedom so that we can get up and back. Additionally, if we cue it in a way that keeps the elbows in close to the body, just like when we move people from high to low push-up, it can reinforce that we really want more of the serratus anterior, which connects the scapula to the rib cage. We don't want the upper trapezius to lift the shoulder blades up when we're trying to come into that back bend. We want the serratus to upwardly rotate and hug the scapula onto the back. So a good way to do that is to have them sit on the ground, take one arm up, take one hand back, pull the arm in, and then push up and go back. Now, you may know this as, sometimes people call it wild thing or flip dog, but it's different because in that scenario, you're taking people from down dog and you're flipping them over. And that can be really dangerous if they have any kind of rotator cuff or shoulder instability, because you're asking them now to go from down dog and to flip over. So this is the low part of the pose, and it is most at risk. Here, it's a lot safer because I'm sitting on the ground. This arm is nice and steady. This arm goes up. I pull it in. I start to reinforce that serratus action, and then I go up and back. So try that with your classes. What you can do is take them on one side, up and back 3 times. Encourage them to relax and look back. Take them on the other side, up and back 3 times. Encourage them in that third one to hold spinal extension and trust and let the head relax back. And then have them do 1 or 2 wheels. I've had students come up to me after class as recently as the past few days and say, I finally could get up. I know as a teacher, as I do this as a preface and then I offer wheel, I see more people in the class trying it, and I see more people starting to get that upward movement. The other thing you can do is ask them to lift their heels, and that's a good way to give them a little breathing room in terms of their feet. So I hope you find these things helpful. What I'm going to close with is, here we are at the end of January, depending on when you're watching this. It's the 28th, I believe, 28th or 29th. And all this week, starting Monday, I released a podcast series. My podcast is Conversations for Yoga Teachers. So Monday, Tuesday, today is Wednesday, tomorrow's Thursday. Those 4 episodes go together as a series. There's a common theme, and you have to listen to them in order. So depending on when you watch this video, those will always be up. Those episodes will always be up. But the last episode, which goes live tomorrow, has an opportunity for you, which is time limited through the first week of February 2020. So depending on when you consume this video, you may or may not be able to do that. The content will still be good. If you are watching this video at the end of January and we're not yet in February, or maybe even in the first week of February, you'll still be able to take advantage of that. The theme of this entire series is an anatomy theme. That's, again, my specialty, what I love to focus on. So I'll just leave you with that as a way to give you an idea of the topic. The podcast name, again, is Conversations for Yoga Teachers, and you can find it on iTunes, Podbean. You can even listen to it on my website. My website is barebonesyoga.com. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. So please leave a comment below, and don't forget to click to subscribe. Thanks so much. Namaste.